But I wanted to start by saying this. How many of you have heard, and I know that so many of the cults teach this, Mormons, so many others, and you'll hear this, even non-religious people who like to criticize the Bible. They will say, you know, the Bible was copied over and over again. We have hundreds of manuscripts copied end to end to end to end to end, and hundreds of generations of manuscripts. So, you know, sort of like Pat had referred to the telephone game. Remember that? And they just say it, and it gets changed over time. There's so many hundred. How many of you have heard that? Yeah, it's very common. Here's the problem with that. It's absolute fabrication. It's an absolute lie. We now know, and this studying has been done over the last several years, and it's really eye-opening. How many years does a manuscript last? Especially a parchment one. A papyrus manuscript of a sacred text. Now, we're not talking about the average letter, you know, from, you know, Joe A to Joe B. We're not talking about letters. We're not talking about casual stuff. We're talking about the handling of what are considered sacred documents. So when you look at that in antiquity, how many generations of a sacred document do you need to get over, say, 1,000 years? How many documents do you get to transmit a text over a period of 1,000 years? Well, here's what we now know. Very solid research on this. The average papyrus document in antiquity lasted from 300 to 400 years. The average parchment document in antiquity lasted 400 to 500 years. They could even last longer than that. The only problem with it was that the ink would begin to fade, so you'd have to get a scribe, and scribes are always nearsighted in antiquity. There's no glasses, so those of you who are nearsighted would be scribes. Those of you who are farsighted would do something else, but they would have to be re-inked. You could literally sit and re-ink over the letters once again. So, and once you did that, then you're good to go for another few hundred years. Here's the interesting thing that we now know. How many generations of manuscripts would it take to get from the original writings of Moses down to the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls or the time of the New Testament? 3 or 4. That's it. Put end to end, if you put them end to end, only 3 or 4 document generations to get from the original writings of Moses down to the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Well, how long does it take to get from the time of the New Testament, Dead Sea Scroll period, the time of the apostles, from there to the printing press? Once you get to the printing press, you don't have that problem anymore. To get to the printing, same thing, 3 or 4, maybe 5 generations. So to get from the original writings of Moses all the way down to the printing press, we only need about 8 to 10 generations of documents. That's nothing. That's nothing. And so, anyway, I just wanted to clear that up. So when someone says to you, oh, we need these hundreds of generations of copying and copying over thousands of years, absolute nonsense. We only need, in fact, if you can re-ink a document and you can stretch it, we could even span the time from Moses to the printing press in about 4 or 5 documents. As long as they're not written on papyrus. Papyrus deteriorates, but parchment lasts a long time. How do we know that? The Dead Sea Scrolls, the great Isaiah scroll that Pat mentioned, is written on what? It's written on parchment. Well, how old was it when they found it? It was 1,000 years old by then, or over 1,000 years old. So, well, more than that, it goes, we have to count the 2,000 years going all the way back 200 years before Jesus, so about 2,200 years old. And it's still there, and it's still readable. So you see, all of this nonsense that people put against the Bible can often be quickly dismissed by just looking at the facts. So, the manuscript tradition of the Bible is pretty phenomenal. Now, I I call this little presentation Blast from the Past. This comes from our excavation at Tal El Hammam in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and I bring you greetings from our team. And we were the largest archaeological project in that part of the world for many, many years, a couple of decades, and it's still ongoing, even though we've suspended the excavation proper for a while. Because we have to publish. We have to get our final publication volumes completed. It takes 8 to 10 years to do that. And so I'm not getting any younger. And so we have to focus on that, and we have to get that done. A lot of archaeologists die, and they don't ever get their publications done. So we have to do this because I want to see them in print, and so I can go to the Lord, feeling good that we finished the job we were put out to do. So that's what we're working on now. I call this Blast from the Past. The original title on this PowerPoint 3 days ago was Where Scripture and Science Collide. Now, sometimes they do a little bit, but what I found is when you do good science and you do good biblical interpretation, they don't collide. They fold together, harmonize together perfectly. And so I said, well, I'm not talking about a collision here when we talk about the discovery of Sodom. I'm not talking about science and Scripture colliding. I'm talking about science and Scripture collaborating. So that's what we're going to see today. Now, this is the book you need. If you have to read this book. It's really well written. I can say that because I didn't write it. So why is your name first on the book? It's first on the book because I provided all the information, but my co-author, Dr. Latane Scott, superlative award-winning author, amazing lady, and she can make gum chewing just really interesting in her writing. So she puts you at my elbow, so to speak, watching the archaeological process happen. It's a terrific book. In fact, it's so well written. She did such a fabulous job on this book that some college grammar books actually came out with examples, paragraphs from this book as examples of good grammatical structure. So anyway, she did a terrific job. So anyway, I encourage you to read it. It's a fun read, but it's also technically correct. Now, if you'd like to go to our website and check out what we do, this is the original website. It's still there, talelhammam.com. Will you remember that? No. So we said, we got to come up with a better thing, easier. digsodom.com. There you go. That's easy to remember. Dig Sodom, and that'll get you to the website. And here's the other one that you need to do. And you need to do this because we do fundraising shamelessly every episode of this. You can get the THEP, Tal El Hammam Excavation Project Sodom email updates by texting the word Dig Sodom, all one word, Dig Sodom, to 22828, and then follow the instructions on your phone to enter your email address and all that. And then whenever we put out our updates and we keep you, what's happening with the science, what's happening with the analysis, what's happening with our interaction with scholars, and we keep you up on all of that, and it's a lot of fun. So that's a good one. And we also will let you know when conferences are coming up and when, in fact, we let everybody know that we were going to be here in Hawaii from our list. So keep you up with what we're doing here and all around the world. And so that's a good one to do. I'm going to remind you of this. Maybe I don't need to, but here it is. Did you realize we no longer live in a Bible-friendly world? I think you've probably noticed that recently. Here's a book. I picked this book up at a Christian Bible bookstore in Albuquerque. And had a nice title. I actually knew of it. I'd heard the title. I saw it there. The title of the book is called Prelude to Israel's Past by Lemke. But look what he says. The patriarchal narratives are fiction, not reality. That world, does not represent the real world. It stands outside the usual representation of time and space. As a matter of fact, neither the narratives or their world can be dated to any precise period. I mean, if you can buy that kind of a book in a Bible bookstore, now, I'm sure that if they knew what was in it, they looked at the title and we'll put that in our store. But nobody ever read it. If they'd have read it, they probably wouldn't have put it in their store. But this is the kind of thing you get. But this is what 99% of scholarship today thinks in archaeology, Near Eastern history. This is what they believe. Here's another one. Combination, I think I'll read it from here. It's better. Combination of archaeological and historical research demonstrates that the biblical account of the conquest and the occupation of Canaan, that's of course Joshua and the Israelites, is entirely divorced from historical reality. Is that shocking? Should be shocking. In fact, when I say this, that most, and I'll probably say 80-85% at least of Israeli archaeologists do not believe that Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, and Joshua were real people. In fact, most Israeli archaeologists do not accept the historicity of the Torah, of the first 5 books of the Bible. First 7, actually. It's not history to them. It's myth. And in fact, I was speaking to the Biblical Archaeological Society of Pittsburgh, and one of the rabbis, and Pat told me that was going to happen. That little thing came off, and so I don't want to lose the batteries. There we go. All right. So I go to this thing, and I present, and have a rabbi come up to me afterwards. And I find out he's one of the 12 rabbis on the continuing Mishnaic Council for Judaism. He's one of the guys continuing to write official Jewish religious literature. And he came up to me and he said, "You know, I think maybe Sodom existed after all." So here's one of the top rabbis on the planet, and he doesn't really accept that all of this stuff is true. And so this is shocking to hear, but sometimes we have to go back to the people that wrote the book in the first place and say, yeah, it's true. You know, your book is true. You need to pay attention to it. Now, there appeared an article on the front page of the Wall Street Journal a few years ago in which they were talking about our site and our discoveries. And in that article, they put a quotation from one of our colleagues, at that time University of Arizona, Dr. Bill Deaver, who is accepted by many people as sort of today the dean of biblical archaeologists, not biblical archaeologists. In fact, he says, "I didn't personally cause the death of biblical archaeology. I only wrote the obituary." That's what he says. But he says, "No responsible scholar goes out with a trowel in one hand and a Bible in the other." Now, normally I wouldn't pay attention to that because I know him. And so I would just blow it off, except it was aimed at me. And by the way, I have Bill come to our symposium several times. In fact, he told me a few years ago, he said, "I'm getting older now." He said, "Steve, you're the only conference I'll come and speak to because you allow me to come and speak, and we have open dialogue, and we really have a good time." And we do. He's a terrific guy. And but started out as a preacher, evangelical preacher, and became an atheist by studying archaeology. That's interesting, isn't it? But so he aims this at me. But I came back with this. "No responsible scholar digging in the Holy Land goes out without a trowel in one hand and a Bible in the other." And I'll tell you why. The reason is because the Bible, bottom line here, the Bible is still the best collection of geographical and historical documents we have preserved from antiquity, period. Period. There is nothing else, no other collection or group of literature coming from the ancient world, and by that I mean prior to the Greco-Roman world, back in the Bronze and the Iron Age, there's nothing else coming from that period of time that remotely approaches the Bible in its geographical and historical accuracy. So, if you're going to be an archaeologist working in what we call the Bible lands, then you would be remiss, you would be irresponsible not to take that book into the field, because it's the best geographical and historical outline you've got for that region, period. There's not another one you can even point to. So, archaeologists get a little arrogant and disingenuous sometimes when they try to slam the Bible. They think that nobody's going to notice, but we should notice that when they say these kinds of things, they are really all wet. All right. Well, I talk about this. The dialogical integration of the text, the Bible, and archaeology. Now, how do we go about finding historical information? Well, we can read the Bible, and then we can go check it out in the field, right? We can read the Bible, take the text, and we can go over and dig. We can look, we can search. But what we want is, we want this thing to go both ways. We want the text to illumine our archaeology, and we want our archaeology in turn to illuminate our text. They go together. Why? Because they come from the same world. The Bible rises from real history. These are real people and real events who had real experiences and were eyewitnesses to the things they record. And the ground preserves much of this. Battles, cities, rivers, lakes, all of this kind of stuff. It's all there. We need both because they're the same book. The Bible represents reality. Archaeology, done properly, represents reality. We're trying to look at the physical, material reality of that book. It's all one and the same. By the way, as I've been listening to the conference so far, this thought keeps coming through my mind, because I often say it to my students, and I certainly say it to non-Christians. And we've been talking about inspiration of the Bible. We've been talking about inerrancy of the Bible. That's all great. I believe that. But I know that this is true. Even if God had absolutely nothing to do with the production of the Bible at all, nothing. Even if the Bible were just a pure human production, do you know that it would still be historically good enough to establish the resurrection of Jesus from the dead? It would still be good enough to establish the historical credibility of the events it records? So, even if the God had nothing to do with the production of the Bible, it would still lead us to the fact that Jesus rose from the dead, which means he is who he claims to be, God in the flesh. You see how that works? And so what I say is, hey, the inspiration of the Holy Spirit over the Bible and the inerrancy of the Bible is just a one-up. That's a one-up. It's not just, the Bible is first and foremost a book of theology? No. The Bible is first and foremost a book of history. It happens to contain theological ideas and principles, but it is first and foremost a book of history. Look at the New Testament. What are the Gospels? History. What's the book of Acts? History. What does the rest of the New Testament refer to? The history, that which we have seen and heard and touched, handled. Okay? That's what it is. So, this is very important stuff. A lot of people have put the Bible on the shelf with the Bhagavad Gita and the Book of Mormon and other religious books. You can't do that. Because the biblical Jesus, the biblical events, all of that are in physical, tangible reality, not myths and legends and visions. Got it? Okay. The Bible did not drop out of heaven on a gold tablet. The Bible did not drop into anybody's lap. The Bible was written painfully, slowly, by real people experiencing real things listening really in physical time to the voice of God and the movement of the Holy Spirit to get accurate transmission of ideas and what God wanted us to know, no more, no less. That's our book. Hey, it's solid and it holds up to every scrutiny you want to put to it. So what I say, let's focus in then on Sodom. What I say is that because the book of Genesis is the most criticized book in the Bible, and the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and good grief, fire out of the sky, come on. This is myth and legend, isn't it? Well, the existence and location of Sodom and the cities of the Kikar is a perfect test case for the historical accuracy of the Bible. Here it is. If this story is true, if these cities really exist, and if this story is true, what does that say about the Bible? It says a lot. So, how do you go about finding a lost city? Now, the cities did get lost. The cities of the plains, Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, they got lost because people couldn't find them for a long time. Now, what's interesting, if you go back to the 19th century explorer scholars with riding around, and these were government officials and surveyors and some missionaries, riding around the Holy Land back in the 1800s with literally Bibles over their saddle horns, and they're going from place to place to place following the text. What's interesting is that all of those guys, and we went back and looked at every single one of them, they all put Sodom north and east of the Dead Sea, not south like a lot of the 21st century or 20th century archaeologists have done. Why did they do that? I'll tell you why in a second, but it is because they read the text. I always say, if you're going to do biblical archaeology, if you're going to study Bible, anything, you know, it's probably a real good idea to read the Bible. And I just take somebody's word for it. Go back and really look at what it says. Well, let me go back and get that one. So if you're going to find a lost city, you need to do three things. You need to look in the text, and you need to determine what the right place is. You need to draw a theoretical map based on the geographical information embedded in the biblical text. You must do that. If you don't do that, you're just going to be walking around in the dark. So, you got to be biblically in the right place. And then you got to look at the right time frame. You might be in the right place, but if you're excavating and you don't find the material culture from the time of the Bible characters in the story, you're not there yet. You might have to go dig over there, or over there. So, right place, yes. But then when we excavate, we need to find the pottery, the material culture that identifies the historical, cultural horizon from the Bible itself. So in the case of Sodom, we can go to the right place, but when we start excavating the cities that are in that area, we need to find the right time frame. We need to see the time of Abraham, as we'll see. And then you need to find the right stuff, because there's a storyline there. Remember, Lot sat in the gateway of Sodom? What does that say? It's a fortified city with a gateway. Well, if you don't find a fortified city with a gateway, you haven't got Sodom. And so, you got to have all the right stuff. And by the way, all the way through the Sodom narratives, there's so much detail about those cities that it's pretty amazing. But that's the right stuff. By the way, I always tell people, I love the word stuff because it covers a whole lot of stuff. And so we can just cram everything into that. Everything else you need to discover in the right stuff. Right place, right time, right stuff. So let's walk through it. How about the right place? This brings us to the geography of the cities of the plain. Now, I know that what you really wanted to have today, you just really needed it to get you all jazzed up about the Bible. That's geography. I mean, what's more exciting than geography? I can see your eyes lighting up right now. Well, it is pretty exciting, I think. We're going to look at Genesis 13, 1 to 12. And the reason we're going to look at these verses specifically is this is the only passage in the Bible that is specifically written to take the reader to the city of Sodom. Only one. There may be other little allusions and things in other passages, but this is the only one that you can use. This is the only historical, geographical passage in the Bible specifically written consciously to take you to the city of Sodom. And so let's look at it, and here it is. I'll read it from over here. Now, I have used little ellipses, these little dots, to remove some of the non-geographical stuff. So, let's read through it. Abram came to the place between Bethel and Ai, and he lifted up his eyes and saw the whole plain of the Jordan. It was well watered, like the garden of Yahweh, like the land of Egypt. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now you see the word plain? It's in yellow. It's used 3 times there. And the next thing I'm going to hit is probably not going to line up with that, because when you jump one PowerPoint from your computer to another one, it sometimes messes it up. Yep, you see? All those circles are supposed to be around those, the word plain, but forgive that. The word plain here is the translation of the word kikar in Hebrew, kikar. Here's the problem with translators sometimes. Sometimes translators translate what they think it says, not what it actually says. This is an example of what I thought it should say rather than what it actually says. Do you know the word kikar is not a geographical term at all? It doesn't mean plain. It doesn't mean valley. It doesn't mean flat place. None of that. It has no geographical meaning whatsoever, 0. So why'd they translate it plain? Because that's what they wanted it to say. It doesn't say that. It says circle, disc. The word kikar means a circle or a disc. It can refer to a flat circular loaf of bread. Does Hawaii have one of those? We have tortillas in New Mexico, right? We have the flat circular loaf of bread. And it means that in the Bible. Most of the time in the Bible, it means a flat circular loaf of bread, like a pita or a tortilla. Other times in the Bible, it means a talent, like a talent of silver, a talent of gold. What is that? It's a flat disc-like a big giant coin, ingot of metal. Okay? Flat circular. It means circle. If you go to Jerusalem today and you hit one of those traffic roundabouts, a lot of people hate those traffic roundabouts. If you look at the sign, it says kikar, kikar this, kikar that. It's a circle. That's all kikar means. A circle, a disc. And so what it says is that the whole disc of the Jordan was well watered. What's the disc? Now see the Dead Sea? And kind of the greenish color there, blocked in. That's the Dead Sea. North of the Dead Sea is the alluvial plain of the Jordan River. It's circular. The Jordan comes down real close to the Jordan, or the hills come down real close to the Jordan River, all the way down from the Sea of Galilee. Right 25 kilometers north of the Dead Sea, it widens out into a large alluvial plain and then closes back on the Dead Sea. It's a circle. And it's the best watered agricultural land in the region. If you go there today and look at it, it is lush. And by the way, it's the circle, the kikar of the Jordan. What does the Jordan mean? Ha Yarden. The Jordan. It means the descending. The descending. The descending of what? The descending of the Jordan River descends down through its channel and terminates at the Bay of the Dead Sea, at the mouth of the Jordan below Pisgah. Where's Pisgah? Right there north of the Dead Sea. It's Mount Nebo. Overlooks the Kikar. So that's where it ends. Do you suppose that the descending of the fresh water would terminate at the north end of the Dead Sea, where it hits the lowest spot on the planet? 1,300 feet below sea level? Yes. The Jordan fresh water terminates when it hits the Dead Sea, which is the dead water, the salt water, the salty water. By the way, it's not like sea salt. It's anhydride salt. You drink it, it'll kill you. That's why it's dead, because nothing can live in it. And so the water there is dead. The living water of the Jordan dies as it goes into the Dead Sea. So this is the Kikar of the Jordan, north of the Dead Sea. End of story. That's where Sodom is located. So where was Lot standing when he lifted up his eyes and saw that the whole circle of the Jordan was well watered? Well, guess what? He's right there. Bethel and I are 12 miles north of Jerusalem. We excavated there for 7 years. We know what you can see from there. And you can see what Lot saw. He looked over and saw the whole circle of the Jordan Valley. And then it says what? He traveled eastward and pitched his tent ad Sodom, as far as Sodom. Well, guess what? That means that Sodom and the cities of the plain have to be there and cannot be anywhere else. Because that's the geography of the text. Doesn't say he went south. Doesn't say he took a right turn, left turn. He didn't go anywhere. He went straight ahead west, forward toward the rising sun. I'm sorry, eastward toward the rising sun. And so Sodom could only be there. And so this was our theoretical map going in. This was the map drawn from the biblical text and understanding the geography of the area. So that's where Sodom is located, not there where the traditional site of Sodom is located at the south end of the Dead Sea. And I will just briefly say that all the sites located toward the southern end of the Dead Sea that are sometimes identified on YouTube and by some people as Sodom and Gomorrah, did you know all of those sites? All of those sites were out of business, belly up, non-existent after 2500 BC. They all went belly up 2500 BC. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before Abraham was ever born. That's an archaeological fact, so anybody that tells you that Babadra, Numera, any of those sites at the south end of the Dead Sea are Sodom and Gomorrah are just archaeologically ignorant. They shouldn't be. They're either ignorant or they're willfully ignorant, which both are bad. They ought to know better, and I'm calling them out all the time on it, and I'm always asking them, well, you debate me. Let's get a debate on, let's film it and put it up on the internet. They won't. They won't because they know they're wrong. Or if they don't know they're wrong, then that's even scarier. But anyway, that's it. Now I want to show you something. This is from the Sacred Bridge. This is the only historical atlas of the Bible lands that is usable in a doctoral dissertations. It's the scholarly Bible atlas. And I want to show you north and east of the Dead Sea. And this is a site map. This is listing all the archaeological sites in the area. But look at that area northeast of the Dead Sea that we just said where the cities of the plain, according to the Bible, actually belong. Why is it blank? Because people in the past, so many scholars so doubt the biblical text and say that the cities of the plain are mythical that they didn't even bother to go look for them. But let me show you what the map now looks like, and this is in the archaeological literature. We're being asked to write chapters in books and all kinds of peer-reviewed publications on it. Tal El Hammam, Sodom, is now known as the largest continuously occupied, most important city in the entire southern Levant. You didn't know that, did you? Sodom, wow, it's got big billing even amongst the archaeologists. Let me show you what this land now should look like. It should look like this. Over 14 major archaeological sites sitting in this area. The big dog on the block is that big circle. That's Tal El Hammam. And these are the Bronze Age sites. These are the sites from the time of the patriarchs in this area, and nobody paid attention to them or even knew they were there. There were a few people that did, but generally the larger archaeological scholarly community totally ignored them. And now they're a little bit embarrassed about it. And basically what we tell them is, you guys didn't pay attention to the biblical text of the location of Sodom and the cities of the plain, and therefore you didn't go check it out and you didn't find them. But we did, and we did. And so there they are, Now, by the way, that was easy, wasn't it? I mean, how difficult is it to slice through the biblical text? Very simple. It's north and east of the Dead Sea. But what about the right time? What's the chronology of the cities of the plain? It's very easy to establish the correct time of Abraham. W.F. Albright knew what it was. Pretty much everybody that studies this knows what it is. But you have to pay attention to the archaeology to get it right. A lot of people want to put Abraham too early, and that's dangerous because of this simple fact. None of the towns mentioned in the patriarchal narratives, I'm talking about Hebron, Jerusalem, Shechem, Dan, Laish, Damascus, none of those mentioned in the patriarchal narratives existed between 2500 and 1800 BC. You can't put Abraham in that stretch of time, because none of the geography necessary for the patriarchal narratives exists in that time frame. You have to get Abraham at least after 1800 BC, when all of these towns came back up, when Melchizedek has a Jerusalem, when Abraham has a Hebron to hang out in, when he has a Tel Dan to go to. All of these towns have to exist, so we have to get past 1800 BC, and every single archaeologist in the world worth his salt, no pun intended, I guess, worth his salt, would disagree with that. You can't, because it's just a fact. So, what's the right time frame for Abraham? The early Bronze Age, by the way, what's happening in Genesis 10? The rise is showing us the rise of urbanism. For the first time in the Bible, we're getting the great cities of Mesopotamia, Nineveh, Ur, Akkad, all of those in Mesopotamia, and then it jumps over to Sodom and Gomorrah and Admah, Zeboim, and so we're getting all these great towns. What is this? This is the rise of urbanism, the first fortified urban cities in the world, and that's Genesis chapter 10. So the time frame for Sodom, since Sodom is mentioned in chapter 10, we have to have the early Bronze Age, because that takes us back to the earlier history before the time of the patriarchs, and then we come to the time of the patriarchs and Abraham specifically in the Middle Bronze Age. And that gets us, and not just the Middle Bronze Age in general, but for Abraham past 1800, so we can have the cities that are mentioned in the story. I always said if we could find the city of Sodom, get a really good radiocarbon date on the destruction of it, we could nail this down and confirm this, and that's what we did. We have hundreds of radiocarbon dates from barley samples and other short-life samples, and that's what a radiocarbon date looks like when you pay $600 for it. Yeah, that's what it costs, $600 a pop to date a barley seed. Which upsets me because I'm a ceramic typologist, and I already know we use the ceramics to establish the historical horizon. We use the ceramics to date the strata that we're excavating. So we already know what the time of the stratum is that we're excavating, but everybody now wants, well, what does your radiocarbon say? So it's kind of obligatory to go run the radiocarbon dates, but it never tells me anything I didn't know already. So it really irks me to have to spend tens of thousands of dollars to run radiocarbon dates, but that's what we do. So, but it confirms it because it puts the destruction of Sodom around 1700 BC, which is toward the end of the Middle Bronze II period. It's exactly where the Bible puts it. The culture of Abraham in the Bible only fits the Middle Bronze II period, not before, not after, and so it's a perfect fit. Now, so that's not too hard to get to either. The other thing is the right stuff. And what's the right stuff? Well, that's the archaeology of the cities of the plain, and there's a whole lot here. I'm just going to blast through a little bit of it. Here she is. So why do you call her a she? Because the Bible does. So here's Sodom. Here's Tal Hammam. You can see the big upper tell in the foreground, and you see in the background there's another slope. See, just to the upper left of there, you see another slope that matches. It's identical slope. Do you see it? That's the lower city. The lower city has a big rampart around it, big sloping rampart around it. It's about half a kilometer by a kilometer. And then you have the upper city, which is smaller on the inside. It's very Mesopotamian in style. And so here she is. It is the largest archaeological site in the Jordan Valley, and it's one of the very largest ones in the entire southern Levant of Israel and Jordan. Here's a typical day in the excavation, and I like to bring this up because it shows the size of this thing. This is the palace kitchen. This is the excavation of the palace kitchen. The palace of Sodom, of King Bera of Sodom, is just a little bit larger in footprint than the White House. See, we're not talking about small potatoes here. The kitchen at the palace is 5,000 square feet. The kitchen is 5,000 square feet. That tells you the magnitude of the size of this thing we're looking at. Here's some pottery from the kitchen. Here's Danette and I standing on top of the upper city rampart. And that rampart looks like that, but I don't want to spend too much time on that. That's the reconstruction drawing from the excavations of the city gate, the main city gate from the lower city. You can see a cutaway of it, how elaborate the gateway was. And all of this is done by Dr. Lane Rittmeyer, who's the world's leading specialist archaeological architect. And here's some more from our excavations. It's just building up what the city looked like from the excavated materials. And here's what the city looked like. So if you wonder why the city looks like that, it's because of the excavation. We've excavated all sectors of the city. We don't have to excavate everything to extrapolate what it looks like. So we know where the temple area is. We know where the palace is. We know where the walls and the towers and the gates are. We know where the residential areas are located and administrative buildings. And so a very accurate reconstruction drawing can be made. Now, right time, right place, right stuff. All the stuff that's predicted in the scriptures happens at Tal Hammam. And it's not just Tal Hammam. We have the other cities as well, but I don't have time to talk about them. They're all there. And they're in a very tight configuration within a 7-kilometer circle with Tal Hammam smack in the middle of it. All right. The right story. So, well, the geography was fun, and yeah, okay. The chronology is okay, but how was it destroyed? That's what everybody really wants to know. How bad was the destruction? What does the Bible say? Genesis 19. Fire and burning stone. Actually, it's Goprit Vayesh. Burning stone and fire. So what happened to the brimstone? No brimstone. The word Goprit can, in the later Iron Age, mean brimstone, sulfur, but it has a very wide semantic range. Abraham didn't speak Hebrew, didn't even exist at the time of Abraham. It's a later development. But he spoke Akkadian. That's the lingua franca of the whole world in Abraham's time. And so he spoke Akkadian. If you look at Goprit in Akkadian, what does it mean? Burning stone. Burning stone. And so, by the way, in the Bible, it's also translated many times lightning. So it can mean lightning, it can mean sulfur, but it basically means burning stone. And you can see how they jumped to sulfur because the only stone they knew that would burn was sulfur. And so, but it's not sulfur. It's burning stone. Well, listen to it. Fire, Goprit, burning stone and fire from out of the heavens. What does that sound like to you? What does that sound like to you? Sounds like something meteoritic, doesn't it? It sounds like something came out of the sky. Asteroid, comet fragment, something crashed that came through the atmosphere going 50, 70, 80,000 miles an hour, went from the top of the atmosphere to the bottom of the atmosphere in less than 2 seconds, burned up, went from solid to liquid to gas to plasma instantly, exploded upon the ground at a very high temperature without leaving and these kind of events, if they totally burn up in the atmosphere, don't leave a crater, they just simply have a plasmic splash, so to speak, going about 15, 20, 30 miles a second on the ground and just splash over the landscape and destroy everything. This happened at Tal Hammam. We see it in the archaeology. Immediately when we got into it, and by the way, I just described it, so I'm not going to read this verse. We already quoted it. So burning stone and fire from Yahweh out of the heavens. This is not a volcano. This is not a terrestrial event. This is coming out of the sky. So let's look at it. It says also the next morning after the destruction occurred, Abraham, 50 miles away at Hebron, saw smoke rising from the cities of the plain like smoke from a furnace. How do you do that? You can't do that with normal fires. Couldn't even do that with a volcano. Wouldn't do that. It would be picked up by the easterly winds coming off the Mediterranean, blown into the eastern desert. This came out of the sky. When these events come in from space, and they're now very well documented, they suck space to the ground, literally, and then the destruction and the dust and the pulverization of material from the ground is sucked back through the entry portal in a vortex out above the atmosphere. So, and so this plume coming from this kind of event would be visible from hundreds of miles away. And Abraham could see it clearly from Hebron. Could see the smoke rising as if from a furnace. Well, in our first penetration into the Middle Bronze Age destruction layer from the time of Abraham, this little piece of pottery popped up. This one on the left. It's about the size of the palm of your hand, about like that. What does that surface look like? Glaze. Looks like glass. But wait a minute. Glaze wasn't invented until about 600-700 AD. So I thought, well, what's a piece of Islamic pottery doing way down here in the excavation? And then I picked it up and looked at it. Oh, it's Middle Bronze Age pottery. It's Middle Bronze Age pottery. But the surface is melted into glass. In fact, the surface superficial glass flows over the edge of the break by about 1 millimeter. In other words, it was melted for just long enough for it to slightly begin to creep over the edge of the break and then stopped. So we took it and had it analyzed. By the way, that's the Middle Bronze Age pottery sherd. It is physically identical in every way. Those little white dots, that's calcium separation. The black stuff is carbon separation out of that glass matrix. The stuff on the right is trinitite from the first atomic bomb explosion in New Mexico. In fact, every scientist who's picked this up and looked at it, that Middle Bronze sherd, looks at it and says, oh, nice piece of trinitite. That's what they say. Why? Because they know it's physically identical. Well, we had this thing analyzed. Of course, when it goes into the scanning electron microscope of the analyzer, it tells you everything about it, right? You have a screen about that big, and the USGS geologist that was doing the look at this particular sherd, she has on the screen, there's this thing that looks like a basketball. It's like that big on her screen. And I said, well, what in the world is that? She said, that's a zirconium crystal. I said, okay. Well, why is it round? She said, well, because it melted. It lost its angularity. It got heated to the point of melting. And by the way, this is not in the glass. This is below the glass, about midway through the depth of the sherd, which is about a quarter inch thick. So it's about 1/8 of an inch from the top and away from the glass. It's not in the melted portion. It's below the melted portion. I said, well, what kind of temperature does it take to like melt a zircon? She said about 2,500 degrees centigrade. Ooh, that's pretty hot. How hot's lava? Volcanic lava. 1,800 to 2,000 degrees, maybe 2,200 at the most. Well, this is not terrestrial temperature. This is really, really high. And then she goes to another one, and in the side of this one, there's little bubbles. And I said, what's that? She said, this one's off-gassing. This zircon not only melted into a little bubble shape, but it also is off-gassing. These are bubbles. It's starting to boil. The zircon crystal is starting to boil. So what is that? What kind of temperature do you need to do that? She said, just short of 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Oh, that's interesting. So all this stuff starts to come up, and then more melt material, and more melt material, and more stuff. And then we get the astrophysicists involved, and we get a whole team of expert scientists on Airburst to come in, 21 scientists from around the world, to start looking at this stuff and taking samples and taking control samples from around the area and all that. And they wind up publishing it. It's now published. If you want to get that, I can get that to you. But the science is saying, hey, we have burning stone and fire out of the heavens confirmed by the archaeology and the science. And not only that, the directionality of this thing is really amazing. We excavate the pottery. Everything is strewn in one particular direction. You can see here are jars. These are over and under. It seems like everything in the city at a moment became airborne, broke apart, and then landed. Not where it was, but someplace else. And these are jars full of grain that were literally picked up in the destruction and then deposited, landing in another place, being smashed. This little jar, these are pieces of a jar. These squares are 6 by 6 meters, about 19 feet by 19 feet. Each one of these squares. So that's about 20, 30 meters of distribution, and it's going in a southwest to northeast direction. We now know the directionality of the event. It's coming in shallow through the atmosphere, going southwest to northeast. And here's that, and not only that, but here's that same southwest to northeast, but this is the vertical dimension. These pieces of this vessel are being found in the full depth of the meter to 2 meter thick destruction matrix, which means that destruction matrix is single event. It's a single event. It's the biggest destruction layer ever in the Near East. Here's that jar. You can see that. Let me get closer on it. You can see some pieces of the jar landed where there was nothing smoldering, so it didn't get discolored. Other pieces of the jar landed near things that were burning and smoldering in the ground after the destruction. And so it gets all this discoloration and these different colors. And we have many, many, many vessels that we're tracking that were blown over large distances. We even suspect one now being removed from other parts of it by over 100 meters, like a football field apart. That's pretty amazing. Here's a big saddle kern. This thing is huge. You can see it's a meter long. It's really thick. This big stone weighs about 400 kilos, and you can see here it is. But look at it. It's turned over on its side. It's got this grinding platform, but the grinding platform is turned. This thing is turned a quarter turn. Which direction? Northeast. That's a powerful blast that could turn a grinding stone like this in that direction. And so everything on the side is turned in that direction. And there's some more stuff, and that's the top. The buildings were literally sheared off at that level across the site. It's utterly stunning. Here's a piece of mud brick. Here's what it looks like when you clean it. Here's a piece of mud brick that's literally bubbling and melting. It's amazing stuff. Not only do we have bits and pieces of everyday life, we have bits and pieces of people preserved. Mostly anybody directly exposed would have been vaporized. But some of the individuals are in between walls and behind big walls. And this is not a whole skull. It's a piece of a skull and the upper dentition, and that was all. Here's the upper dentition of it. But we found pieces of people in the destruction matrix. And it's violent, it's horrible and awful. And anyway, this is the destruction event as it comes in over the north end of the Dead Sea in that direction, southwest to northeast. And maybe this will play. Here is a simulation of that thing coming in. This is all going to play out in less than 2 seconds. We're playing it slow. See the heat there? Now watch the heat on the ground light up some of the city below, and you'll see how hot it gets. That red is upwards of tens of thousands of degrees. Anyway, this is a computer simulation from one of the scientific papers. Now, why did God destroy Sodom? Why did he destroy Sodom? Here it is, from God's mouth to our ears. It's the only place in the Bible where God himself tells us why he destroyed Sodom. Here it is. Because they were arrogant, overfed, unconcerned, did not take care of the poor and needy. Literally, it says the widow and the orphan. And they were haughty and did detestable things before me. That's why he destroyed Sodom. But look what's up front. And we know what the detestable things are, right? We know what that is. But that's not the major. God says because they were arrogant, overfed, unconcerned, didn't take care of the poor. They didn't take care of the needs of people. They didn't love people. They didn't help people. And they were absolutely arrogant. They were absolutely unconcerned with people. And God said, that's enough. I will destroy them. When I read that passage for the first time years and years ago, I thought, that sounds like a country I know. Sound like a country you know? I think so. So what does all this mean in the end? It says, as it was in the days of Lot, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. I think we've gotten there. Do you think we have? I think so. Sodom really happened, folks. Archaeological science, there's no doubt. Sodom existed, and Sodom really happened. What was it? It was the judgment of God. And after it happened, the story of Sodom becomes the principal metaphor in Scripture for the wrath of God. Jesus is coming again. And when he comes again, it will not be for the purposes of salvation. It will be for the purpose of judgment. And as Peter said, the elements will melt with intense heat. He's coming again, only this time it's going to be planet-wide, and no one will survive except the redeemed. Thank God. Thank Jesus for his blood and his resurrection that redeems us from sin and the wrath to come. Thank you.